like your company's metrics define your self-worth, you're not alone, and it's time to talk about it.
Hi, I am Joanna Trojak. I am a host of Founder Unfiltered, product management consultant, and founder of Heart Renew, self-dating app that helps you connect to yourself, not just other people.
Today we're tackling something that hits close to home for most founders, but rarely gets discussed openly. What happens when your startup becomes who you are, not just what you do? I'm exploring the psychological phenomenon of founder identity fusion, why it's so damaging, and how to build a healthier relationship between your sense of self and your business. This isn't just about work-life balance. This is about survival, mental health, and ultimately building better businesses from a place of wholeness rather than fragility. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's dive into one of the most important conversations we can have as entrepreneurs. When you're a founder, especially in the early stages, your startup isn't just something you build. It becomes who you are. You introduce yourself with your job title first. You feel right when metrics rise and worthless when they crash. You start to believe that the product's value equals your own worth. I've been there, and I didn't even realize how deep it went until everything started to unravel with my first startup. The signs showed up in the subtle ways. I avoided rest because rest felt like betrayal to the mission. I couldn't take feedback without spiraling into self-criticism. If something failed, I didn't think the product failed. I thought I did. According to research from the Founder Mental Health Project, 22% of entrepreneurs report mental health concerns, with identity fusion being a primary contributing factor. This phenomenon is so common that psychologists have termed it founder identity captivity, where a sense of self becomes completely entangled with your company's performance. Dr. Michael A. Freeman, psychiatrist at UCSF, who specializes in entrepreneur mental health, found in his research that founders are 30% more likely to experience depression than the general population. Entrepreneurial identity becomes so all-consuming that any business setback feels like a personal failure rather than simply information about market conditions or product market fit. The startup ecosystem actually rewards this kind of unhealthy identity merger. Eat, sleep, build, repeat is practically a badge of honor in our community. We celebrate founders who sacrifice everything, their health, relationships, hobbies, for their companies. We treat obsession as dedication and burnout as rite of passage. But no one talks about the psychological cost of that kind of identity fusion. The startup mythology tells us that the most successful founders are those who can't imagine doing anything else, who live and breathe their mission, whose entire sense of purpose is wrapped up in their company's success. This creates what researchers call identity foreclosure, where you commit to an identity so completely that you stop exploring other aspects of yourself. It's the psychological equivalent of putting all your eggs in one basket, except the basket is your sense of self-worth. The venture capital ecosystem reinforces this by investing in founders, not just companies. Investors want to see that you are all in, that this isn't just a job for you, but a calling. While passion is important, this expectation can push founders toward unhealthy levels of identity investment in their business. There's actual science behind why this identity fusion happens so easily for entrepreneurs. When we repeatedly associate our worth with external outcomes, our brains create neural pathways that strengthen this connection. Research in neuroplasticity shows that our identity-forming neural networks can become so intertwined with our professional outcomes that a business failure triggers the same brain regions as physical pain. Stanford psychologist Jamil Zaki calls this emotional convergence, where your emotional state becomes synchronized with external events rather than your internal values. In startup life, This translates to emotional states that rise and fall with metrics, founding rounds, and user growth rather than being anchored in stable self-knowledge. Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett's research on emotional construction shows that our brains are constantly making predictions about how we should feel based on context. When your identity becomes fused with your startup, your brain starts predicting that company success should make you feel worthy and company struggles should make you feel worthless. These predictions become self-fulfilling emotional realities. This is why a failed product launch doesn't just feel disappointing, it feels devastating. Your brain has learned to interpret business outcomes as direct reflection of your value as human being. Looking back at my first startup, I can see all the warning signs I missed. When I introduced myself at networking events, I didn't say, "Hi, I'm Jana." I said, "I'm the founder of," as if the title contained my entire identity. My mood became completely dependent on business metrics. A good day meant high engagement or positive investor feedback. Bad day meant low signups or critical user reviews. I had essentially outsourced my emotional regulation to market forces completely outside my control. When we couldn't raise more money from investors, when nobody seemed interested in our product, when I had to let go of our team because we ran out of funds, it didn't feel like business challenges. It felt like personal failures that proved I wasn't smart enough, capable enough, worthy enough to succeed. The worst part was that I couldn't see it happening. The fusion was so gradual and so rewarded by startup culture that it felt normal, even virtuous. I thought I was being dedicated and passionate. I didn't realize I was slowly erasing myself. I thought that, yeah, suffering is just natural part of business. You have to suffer, you have to endure, and one day you will be rewarded. I also like to add Polish, and suffering is literally part of my DNA and part of my culture doesn't help because I was raised to believe that suffering is necessary. Life is a war, as my dad used to say. You have to suffer. Good things do not come easily. So naturally, I believed what I was told by my parents, that you have to endure, you have to suffer, instead of just admitting that sometimes suffering is not good for your soul. Sometimes suffering is just suffering. You should leave as early as possible because it means it's not good for you. Now, in building my second startup, the self-dating app rooted in emotional wellness, I'm doing it differently and start with the fundamental reframe. I am not the product. I am the person building the product. That might sound obvious, but when you've tied your identity to your work for years, it takes intentional unlearning. Here's what that looks like in practice. If a post flops or user numbers drop, I don't spiral anymore, at least not every time. I remind myself that quiet launch doesn't equal personal failure. The feature not landing doesn't mean I'm not smart enough. And that less growth this week doesn't make me less worthy as a person. Instead, I ask different questions. What does this teach me about the market? What does this reflect about product market fit? What's still true about me, even when the numbers shift? This approach is supported by research from Carol Dweck on growth mindset, which shows that viewing challenges as opportunities for learning rather than judgments of worth leads to greater resilience and long-term success. I especially try not to have an emotional response to my LinkedIn engagement metrics. I post regular to build awareness for the app, and sometimes posts do really well, while other days they don't. That variability is about algorithms and timing, not about my value as a person or the worth of my ideas. One of the riskiest things you can do as a founder is make your only source of validation external. User likes, investors' applause. External validation is inherently unstable because it depends on factors outside your control. So now I actively track different metrics. My emotional wins, like I asked for help today and I felt stuck. My values alignment, like I stayed true to the mission even when it would have been easier to compromise. My nervous system signaled like I felt regulated and grounded while launching this feature. Internal validation is the only kind that doesn't crash when the market does. This approach is backed by self-determination theory, which demonstrates that intrinsically motivated people, those driven by internal values rather than external rewards, show greater persistence, creativity, and life satisfaction. It hit me one night that I didn't know what I liked to do anymore when I wasn't working. I had become so consumed by founder identity that I lost touch with other aspects of myself. So I started reintroducing myself to myself. I asked questions like, what did I love before I became a founder? What would I do with a weekend and no goals? Who am I when no one's watching and there's nothing to achieve? Also, weren't about dashboards or growth metrics. They were about slow mornings and structured writing, solo adventures, and comfortable silence. All the parts of me that existed before and beyond my professional role. Through my journey and conversations with other founders, I developed what I call the identity work balance matrix to help assess where you stand in relation to your startup identity. Picture a 2x2 grid. On one axis, you have work identification, how much your sense of self is tied to your professional role. On the other axis, you have personal identity, how well developed your sense of self is outside of work. In the bottom left quadrant is identity fusion, high work identification, with low personal identity development. This is where most struggling founders find themselves. Your work has become your entire identity, and you lost touch with who you are outside your professional role. In the top left is identity integration. You see work as an important part of who you are, but not all of it. You maintain other aspects of identity alongside your professional development. Top right is identity autonomy. You maintain clear boundaries between work and self, with strong personal identity that exists independently from professional outcomes. The bottom right, identity vacuum, is where neither work nor personal identity is well developed. This is less common among founders, but can happen after burnout when you lost connection to both professional purpose and personal interest. The goal is moving from fusion towards either integration or autonomy, depending on your personality and values. The key is developing a strong sense of self that exists independently from your company's performance. Here's the counterintuitive truth I've discovered as I began separating my identity from the product. The product has actually gotten better. This happens because I'm no longer building from fear of failure, needed to prove myself, or shame around not being further ahead. Instead, I'm building from curiosity, creativity, and genuine care for the problem I'm solving. When your identity is fused with your product, every design decision becomes existential. You can't pivot easily because pivoting feels like admitting you were wrong about who you are. You can't take user feedback objectively because criticism of the product feels like criticism of your personally. But when you maintain healthy separation, the product becomes your offering to the world rather than your mirror. You can be more experimental, more responsive to feedback, more willing to iterate based on what users actually need, rather than what you need to believe about yourself. This shift aligns with research on innovation showing that emotional freedom, the ability to detach personal worth from outcomes, actually leads to more creative problem solving and breakthrough thinking in product development. And based on my experience and conversations with hundreds of founders, here are the warning signs that your identity has become too enmeshed with your startup. You can't take a day off without feeling guilty, as if rest is somehow betraying your mission or letting down your team. You introduce yourself exclusively by your company's role. Your other identities as a parent, friend, artist, athlete have faded into the background. Your mood directly correlates with your metrics. Analytics dictate your emotional state more than your personal relationship or values. You stop engaging in non-work passions, those hobbies that once defined you as now seen as distractions from the real work. You take product feedback as personal criticism. When someone critiques your app or service, it feels like they're criticizing your intelligence, creativity, or worth as a person. You avoid social situation when business is down, as if you're only worthy of connection when startup is thriving. If 3 or more of this resonates with you, it's time to examine your relationship with founder identity and consider whether you're crossed into unhealthy fusion. territory. Let me share some specific exercises that have helped me and other founders reclaim a healthier sense of identity. Draw a circle and divide it into sections representing different aspects of your identity. Parent, friend, creator, learner. Whatever roles matter to you. Is founder taking up more than 25% of the pie? If so, it might be time to nurture the other slices. Make two separate lists, your personal values and your company's values. Personal values might include creativity, connection, growth, justice. Company values might include innovation, user centricity, transparency. Where do you overlap? Where are they distinct? Honor both sets rather than collapsing them into one. For 1 week, keep a log of moments that brought you genuine joy or satisfaction. How many were related to a company's performance versus other aspects of life, like relationships, learning, physical activities, or creative pursuits? Set a timer for 10 minutes and continuously write answers to who am I beyond your professional role. Push past the obvious answers and see what emerges. This reveals the multidimensional self that exists inside your founder identity. These exercises are adopted from research-backed techniques in positive psychology and narrative therapy designed to help you reconnect with the full spectrum of who you are. After experiencing identity fusion and burnout, I've built what I call a founder identity support system that helps maintain healthy boundaries. A small group of other entrepreneurs who understand the journey but also hold me accountable to my non-founder self. We meet monthly and have agreements to call each other out when work is taking over. Specifically with a therapist go to therapy who understands both identity issues and entrepreneurship. Many therapists don't fully grasp the unique psychological challenges of building company, so finding someone with relevant expertise is crucial. I literally put blocks on my calendar dedicated to activities that have nothing to do with my companies or productivity. Reading fiction, taking photos, cooking elaborate meals, having conversations about topics unrelated to work. I intentionally consumed content unrelated to startups, tax, or business to expand my mental landscape beyond entrepreneurial thinking. I have objects around my workspace that remind me of who I am beyond my founder's role. Family photos, art from pre-startup days, books that shape my thinking, mementos from travels or experiences that predate my company. This system acts as a container for my founder identity, preventing it from overflowing into every aspect of my life. Recent research in neuroscience supports the importance of what psychologists call identity flexibility, the ability to access different aspects of yourself in different contexts. Dr. Shuang Yang studies at Northwestern show that people with flexible identity concept are more resilient to setbacks and more creative in problem solving. When your identity is rigidly defined by one role, even role you're passionate about, you limit your cognitive and emotional resources. But when you can fluidly move between being a founder, a friend, a learner, a creator, you have access to different strengths and perspectives that actually make you better at all of these roles. This is why the most successful long-term entrepreneurs often have rich lives outside their companies. They're not less committed, they're drawing from a broader reservoir of human experience and capability. In today's startup ecosystem, there's tremendous pressure to build a founder brand, to become the face of your company and share your journeys publicly. This can create additional challenges for identity separation because your personal brand becomes tied to your company's success. I want to address this directly because I do build in public and share my founder's journey. The key is maintaining what Brené Brown calls grounded confidence, sharing from a place of secure identity rather than seeking validation through visibility. When your self-worth depends on engagement metrics or public perception, personal branding becomes another form of identity fusion. But when you share from genuine desire to help others or document your learning, it can actually strengthen your sense of self. The difference is internal. Are you sharing to prove your worth, or are you sharing to contribute value? Are you attached to the response, or can you remain grounded regardless how people receive your content? Let me share some mantras that help me maintain perspective when I feel identity fusion creeping back in. My startup is what I create, not who I am. This reminds me that I am the artist, not the artwork. Success is when I stay in integrity with myself, not just when something scales. This redefines success in terms of internal alignment rather than external metrics. Even if this phase, I am still whole. This acknowledges that business outcomes don't determine human worth. These mantras are based on principles from acceptance and commitment therapy, which emphasizes psychological flexibility and value-based action rather than attachment to specific outcomes. Let me address pushback I often hear about this approach. Isn't it normal to obsess over your startup? Isn't that what it takes to win? Obsession might get you to launch, but it won't help you sustain. Research from Harvard Business Review suggests that founders who maintain boundaries between their personal identity and company actually make better strategic decisions because they can see challenges more objectively rather than through the lens of personal threat. How do I start separating my identity from my startup? Begin with noticing. When you catch yourself saying, we're failing, ask whether we actually means I. Practice rewriting your intentional narrative. You are the builder, not the brand. Psychologist Ethan Kross recommends distance self-talk, referring to yourself in third person when thinking through challenges to gain emotional perspective. What if I want to build in public and be the face of the brand? Do it. Just make sure your self-worth isn't riding on the next engagement spike. Anchored inward even as you show up outwardly. Authentic personal branding actually comes from a place of secure identity, not fragile identity-seeking validation. Many successful entrepreneurs have found ways to maintain identity separation while building massive companies. Reid Hoffman talks openly about having specific rituals to transition between founder mode and personal time. Sarah Blakely of Sparks tries different routes for home each day to mentally shift out of work mode. Melanie Perkins of Canva maintained regular surfing practice that has nothing to do with her company, but keeps her grounded in physical experience and flow states. These aren't just nice to have practices, they're strategic investment in psychological sustainability. The common thread is intentionality about creating boundaries between professional and personal identity, even when building companies that require enormous dedication and energy. When you maintain healthy separation between self and startup, the benefits ripple out in unexpected ways. You can evaluate opportunities based on what's the best for the business rather than what makes you feel important or validated. Your personal relationships improve when you're not constantly processing them through the lens of work stress or using them primarily to vent about business challenges. Access to non-work aspect of identity provides fresh perspective and unexpected connection that fuel innovation. When inevitable setbacks occur, they feel like information about the business rather than judgments about your worth as a person. Team members and investors respond better to founders who are grounded in themselves rather than desperately seeking external validation. These aren't just personal benefits. They create real business value through better leadership, clear strategic thinking, and more sustainable growth patterns. If you're in the middle of building something that feels like everything's right now, I want to genuinely remind you, you existed before this product. You'll exist after it. You are not the roadmap, the pitch deck, and the quarterly metrics. You are a person, a whole one, who's allowed to rest, recalibrate, and simply be human. The startup is just one chapter in your story, but you're the author of the whole book. This work of separating your identity from your startup isn't selfish or uncommitted. It's strategic. It's what allows you to build sustainably, lead authentically, and create something meaningful without sacrificing your humanity in the process. Until then, practice seeing yourself as more than your metrics, more than your role, more than your company's performance. You are irreducibly valuable, just as you are, and the truth doesn't change based on how your startup is doing. This is Founder Unfiltered. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.